5 ways to start perimenopause or menopausal weight loss after the age of 40. So I'm going to dive right into these tips. There are 5 to focus on. Number 1, change your macros. It all starts with food. You hear me talk a lot about this on social media. And you know, if you're still following the RDA or the recommended daily allowance by the federal government, you want to stop. Their recommendations, which are 0.8 milligrams per kilograms, is enough to ensure you don't die, but is not enough to starve off the process of sarcopenia or muscle loss with aging. And under eating protein is one of these surefire ways to ensure you are never satiated and lose even more muscle mass. And as I've talked about before, muscle is this incredible organ of longevity, and very, very important that we maintain muscle mass as we get older. In a study that was a randomized controlled trial of 24 menopausal women that were obese, there was an intervention of a low-calorie diet, moderately high in protein, versus low in protein. The results, not surprisingly, identified that maintaining adequate protein intake may help reduce lean mass losses associated with weight loss in older women. Again, it was a randomized controlled trial, but only 24 participants, so we would need further studies to corroborate this, but evidently there is a need for more protein to maintain muscle mass, to maintain insulin sensitivity, and lose weight. So ideally, we want to do 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight. So I aim as a 120-pound woman for 100 to 120 grams a day, no excuses. Jennifer came to me as a 45-year-old frustrated and self-proclaimed frumpy before her time woman. You know, in this instance, when she was so focused on weight loss resistance, we focused on changing her macros first, aiming for 30 to 50 grams of protein with each meal and no more than 30 grams of carbohydrates with her meal. Now, let me be clear, I'm not anti-carb, but if you are insulin resistant or weight loss resistant, you probably need to focus more on carbs. Carb sources from root vegetables, low glycemic berries, and fruits. In 4 weeks, she lost 8 pounds, and we then progressed to other strategies. So ditch the processed carbs, focus on protein first, and depending on your level of insulin sensitivity, adjust your carbohydrates too. Tip number 2, strength training. No surprises here. Protein and strength training go together without question. One little caveat about sarcopenia and assessments. In the European Working Group on Sarcopenia for older people, they proposed using hand grip strength, and this is strongly related to lower extremity muscle power, knee extension torque, and calf cross-sectional muscle area, basically your lower extremities. So you haven't already done this assessment, you definitely want to. Again, hand grip strength is a great indicator of whether or not you have maintained muscle mass. We know that strength training is one of the most valuable ways to support weight loss in perimenopause and beyond. The more muscle mass you possess, the more insulin sensitive you will be. Again, aiming for anywhere from 2 to 3 days of strength training with progressive workouts. In a 2014 study looking at strength training frequency on body composition and lab markers in menopausal women, again, a small sample size, an N of 30, those 30 women. They looked at 1 versus 2 versus 3 days a week of strength training. So strength training increases strength and muscle mass independently of frequency. The most training saw the biggest improvements in glucose and CRP, which is an inflammatory marker, after 16 weeks. So I typically recommend at least 2, if not 3 days a week of strength training, and really focusing in on ensuring you are doing progressive overload, which means you are challenging your muscles. Samantha came to me frustrated with weight loss resistance. She was doing CrossFit or Orange Theory Fitness 5 days a week with little to no rest days. She felt like she was losing muscle mass. She was really struggling with sleep and her macros. I always remind people, I was like, don't worry, we're gonna adjust everything. But what I wanted her to stop initially was doing CrossFit and Orange Theory Fitness. We had her back off on the intensity. She went to walking 5,000 to 10,000 steps a day, depending on her energy levels. Once she mastered that, we slowly introduced 2 days a week of strength training with 48 hours off in between. And she started sleeping better, had less cravings, and started seeing some weight loss slowly. But most importantly, she felt better. Tip number 3, add in creatine monohydrate. This is one of my favorite supplements with good amounts of research behind it. Now, I've already done 2 podcasts on creatine monohydrate, and it is obviously a supplement I really stand behind. But as the third rung in this set of recommendations, it's one that I think is very, very important. It's important because it helps with so many things in the body. Again, go back to those 2 podcasts, but it helps with metabolic health, it helps with brain health, helps with bone health. Creatine is involved in energy mobilization and metabolism. It impacts athletic performance and helps with ATP synthesis, which is the energy molecule in our cells. It also helps in our muscles as well as our brains and bone. It is critically integral for enhancing mitochondrial function. And north of 40, most of us have mitochondrial disease. We know that women have 70 to 80% less endogenous stores of creatine, and that our needs change throughout our menstrual cycles if we're still getting a cycle, as well as in those perimenopause and menopause years. And we can make the argument that this supplement is so versatile that dosing is really dependent on your needs and specific goals. Also, remember that estrogen is a master regulator of bioenergetics in our bodies. As our levels fluctuate and change, it also impacts creatine utilization. You can get creatine from food, but most, if not all, of my patients and clients need some degree of supplementation. We know that lower levels of estrogen actually promote inflammation, and as we are navigating perimenopause and beyond, many of us, especially at the tail end of perimenopause, have less circulating estrogen, which can blunt muscle protein synthesis, increase inflammation, and lead to satellite cell response to anabolic stimuli, which is why resistance training is so important. There's solid research on how creatine may countermeasure menopausal decrease in muscle or sarcopenia, bone, and strength by reducing inflammation, oxidative stress, and serum markers of bone resorption. Recall that loss of muscle mass is linked to insulin resistance and loss of metabolic flexibility. If you notice these recurring themes, it's because they are so important. So eat predominantly animal-based protein, lift weights, and then add in some creatine monohydrate. We'll actually link my product below so you can check it out, as well as those 2 other podcasts that I alluded to as well. So one of my favorite stories is about Lisa. She's a 56-year-old female in menopause on hormone replacement therapy, doing all the right things, but just felt that weight training and optimizing protein weren't enough for her goals. So we started adding in targeted supplementation on top of her other lifestyle choices. We started with 3 grams of creatine daily and then worked our way up to 10 grams daily because she wanted the benefits for bone health as well. We know that these doses can help with metabolic health, muscle and bone health. Her bone health markers have improved, her DEXA scan as well. Here's one really important caveat about creatine monohydrate. We know based on study research that it must be used along with strength training and exercise, not in lieu of it. So if you are thinking that it isn't important to strength train, I would strongly encourage you to understand that creatine is best utilized when our muscles are under a degree of stress, better uptake, and certainly the research supports that creatine monohydrate and exercise go together, and creatine not in lieu of exercise. Tip number 4, get better sleep. So we know that the US pharmaceutical industry spends $28 billion a year on sleep aids and medications, which is staggering. A University of Chicago study revealed that in healthy subjects, getting 4.5 hours a night of sleep over 4 nights had elevated insulin levels of their obese, middle-aged diabetic counterparts, and a 50% reduction in their capacity for glucose disposal. Again, these are young individuals that had 4 nights of crappy sleep. Their blood markers looked like their middle-aged counterparts that were diabetic. There's even more research demonstrating that poor quality sleep increases your risk of hypertension or high blood pressure by 17%, cardiovascular disease by 16%, obesity by 38%. We know that less than 6 hours a night of sleep increases your risk of myocardial infarction, which is a heart attack, by 20%. There's also science demonstrating that sleep deprivation increases insulin resistance by 30%. And for those of you that are night shift workers, and we get a lot of messages from you, we know that your risk for developing not just metabolic disease, but also certain types of cancer is increased by up to 30%. So night shift workers are at a 30% greater risk of developing breast cancer. And according to Dr. Peter Attia, 1 sleepless night is equal to a functional equivalent of being legally drunk. And the impact on car crashes, according to AAA of Washington, D.C. in 2016, demonstrated that out of 7,000 drivers over a 2-year period, less than 5 hours a night of sleep increased car crashes threefold. 4 hours of sleep equaled 11.5 times more likely to be in a motor vehicle accident. And after 7 days of less than 7 hours a night of sleep per night, the brain is as dysfunctional as it would be without sleeping for 24 hours. That's sobering. Poor sleep impacts the DNA and learning related genes in the brain cells of the hippocampus that impacts memory. So if you get a crappy night of sleep and you're struggling to remember things, has a lot to do with the fact that this particular part of the brain was not getting enough rest. So sleeping in a cold, dark room, getting light exposure in the morning, not eating within 3 hours before bedtime, the utilization of blue blockers if you are sensitive to blue light therapy, avoiding alcohol and caffeine can also be very beneficial and get that physical activity in. I'm interrupting this video so that I can tell you about my 3 ways you are sabotaging your weight loss and fat loss. It's a great guide. You can click the link below and grab it now. Super helpful to try to determine what is going on that is contributing to weight loss plateaus and weight loss resistance. Peggy was a 47-year-old woman who had been sleeping poorly for forever, ever since the birth of her twins. This worsened in perimenopause. We did a combination of sleep hygiene, regular physical activity, and added oral progesterone therapy. She took 200 milligrams PO, QHS at night in her luteal phase of her menstrual cycle. So at the tail end of the last 5 to 7 days is when we added in the progesterone. We also added a bit of melatonin and inositol. More on that later. And over time, her sleep quality improved as demonstrated by orometrics and self-perceived scores on the Insomnia Severity Index. So this is absolutely something that middle-aged women can work through diligently. It is not the be-all, end-all, but I remind people that sleep is so foundational to our health that if you're not getting a good night of sleep, sometimes that is the first place we need to focus. Tip number 5, stop freaking snacking. We are not toddlers. No adult should be snacking. And there's no surprises here, folks. Did you think I'd get by without mentioning meal frequency? Obviously, I'm known for intermittent fasting, and in particular for women. Most of us eat far too frequently and or don't eat enough of the right foods. And by that I mean most of us are overeating carbohydrates and not eating enough protein. The National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey from 1971 to 2010 demonstrated that consumption of snacks as a proportion of total calories is increased from 1/10 to 1/4 of our total caloric consumption. This is an overwhelming change in statistics. And according to Dr. Deanna Minich, who I'm interviewing on the podcast later this week, there's a bi-directional relationship between our food and our circadian rhythms. It also impacts gastric emptying, how well our stomach empties, thermogenesis, how well we burn calories, insulin secretion as well. And not surprisingly, we know that insulin secretion is highest earlier in the day, and it's better to consume most of your food earlier in the day versus later. And certainly for most of us, that can include those carbohydrates. We know that time-restricted eating or intermittent fasting research has been found to increase adipokine levels, which impact fat loss and insulin sensitivity. And this whole concept of circadian biology, eating when it's light outside, not eating when it's dark outside, is not new or novel. It's actually aligned with the way that our bodies are designed to thrive. And we know that time-restricted eating puts our bodies back in line with circadian rhythms. We should ideally aim for an 8 to 9 hour feeding window that allows for you to consume ideally 40 to 50 grams of protein with each meal, aiming for 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight. And remember that protein helps keep you satiated. It helps maintain and build proper muscle protein synthesis. And we know that we can then add in healthy fats or carbs if necessary. So if you're having a higher fat meal, like you're having a piece of ribeye or a piece of salmon, you probably don't need to add in a lot of discretionary fats. But if you're having like a filet or a piece of cod or chicken breast, you can probably add in some healthy fats. And focusing in on 30 grams of carbohydrate per meal max, less if you are insulin resistant. Losing weight in middle age is easily the most concerning issue facing most women as they navigate the perimenopause transition into menopause and are dealing with weight loss resistance that they've never experienced before. There are so many changes happening in our bodies, and there is so much misinformation portrayed by what I believe to be well-meaning fit pros and the media that can make it very confusing to navigate making sense of all of it. Briefly, during this transitional period in a woman's life, there are alterations in the neuroendocrine system, in particular hypothalamic, pituitary, ovarian axis that impact increases in fat mass and changes in lean mass that accelerate in the menopausal transition. and according to the SWAN data, a 2 to 4-fold increase in fat gain and loss of lean mass. This makes it harder to lose weight. There are also ethnic differences that were identified in this study as well. So we know that the mean rate of increase in fat mass in the average woman doubles from 1 to 1.7% per year, leading to a 6% total gain in fat mass over the 3.5-year long menopausal transition. The total loss of lean mass during the menopausal transition averages 0.5%, and a lot of this has to do with changes in follicular stimulating hormone and estradiol, which regulate energy balance. And we know this actually accelerates 2 years prior to the final menstrual period. And for many of us, we don't know when this is going to happen, so we may not even be aware this is happening. We know that estradiol impacts energy homeostasis pathways. It controls CNS, so central nervous system food intake, and satiety. It helps regulate adipose tissue lipid storage and metabolism, as well as insulin sensitivity. Additionally, when we're talking about middle-age weight gain or weight loss resistant or even obesity, we're really alluding to something called sarcopenic obesity, which is characterized by reduced muscle strength. So really, any weight loss program or strategy should focus on decreasing fat mass and increasing muscle mass, as I've alluded to in my 5 tips that I've already mentioned in this video. Hey, if you like this video, you guys are going to love this video, and I'll see you there.